The latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Love the name of our next guest publishing company, Wrong Speak.
That's awesome.
Perfect for our times. Adam Coleman's Wrong Speak includes some very straight talk on parenting. We talked about his op-ed in your post last week, and by extension his book. Among other things, he says, becoming an adult used to include the understanding that you're no longer a child. But now that it means adults are allowed to rotate between adulthood and childhood whenever they see fit, constantly making a child's excuses for an adult's poor decisions. And some tough questions for mom and dad if mom and or dad left, if mom and dad split up. And he concludes in part by saying, Here is what is lost today when it comes to family formation and parenting. The single most important duty of parents is the preparedness to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of their children. That includes sacrificing their pride. Abandoned children like me are constantly faced with an unfair choice of either saving their sanity or saving their relationships, afraid to wound the pride of the mother or father who left them. For more on the topic, pleased to be joined by Adam Coleman, author and founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. His book, The Children We Left Behind, How Western Culture Rationalizes Family Separation and Ignores the Pain of Child Neglect. Adam, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
First, just your backstory in your own words to sort of frame what you've considered, what you've gone through, but then, reflecting back on it now as a father yourself, I think is, that trajectory is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, my backstory as a child, I grew up single parent home. My mother was raising myself and my sister. My father was always married, but to someone else. So he wasn't really in our lives. And once, especially, I was born in Detroit. When we left Detroit, I really didn't see him that much. I rarely heard from him, maybe one call a year or something like that, very brief phone call. Essentially, my father was a stranger to me. And what I realized once I had my son at the age of 21 was that I didn't want to be my father. And so I became very vigilant as to what I did, how I treated my son, and ultimately tried to become the father that I would have wanted when I was a kid. And now today my son is 19. He's great. No issues. He's thriving because of my involvement.
And, sort of that progression, not knowing your father, and then when it clicked that you wanted to do things very differently than your father did. I mean, did it just sort of all come rushing in when you knew you were going to have a son, or was this something you were grappling with as you were growing up in your formative years?
I think it was when my son was born. It was a very conscious thought I had the day I was holding my son for the first time. Now, it's one thing to say you want to be an active father, but when you're a child who doesn't have a father, you don't have a blueprint. You end up taking from different areas and trying to figure out what's the best way forward. Whereas a child who has both their parents, but especially a young man has his father in his home, he gets to see it every day. So it's not a foreign concept, as to how you treat your child. Assuming that your father is a relatively healthy person, you want to mimic what your father did. So for me, it was more of a struggle to figure out, yes, I want to be a good father, but how do you be a good father? How do you be a father in general? And also struggling with, how do I be a man? Because I didn't have someone to teach me how to be a man. So much of my younger adult years, was the struggle between the two.
Now, what about mom? Your son's mom?
We never got married, but we always co-parented. We always had a good relationship. Stayed active with my son. He primarily lived with his mother, but I saw him every single week. So we always had a good relationship. She ended up getting married to somebody else. But yeah, we always had a good co-parenting situation.
Are you still estranged from your father? Do you talk to him ever?
The last time I talked, so just so people know, I'm 40 years old now. The last time I talked to my father, I was 21. The last time I saw my father, I was 16. And the last time I talked to my father, I called him, and it was like I was bothering him. So I never attempted to call him, but I also opened the door or left the door open in case he wanted to reach out to me, he could. But my father actually died some years ago, so that never happened. And I found out that he died about 3 months after he did because my mom Googled his name and found the funeral home where he went to.
So he never had any relationship with his grandson then?
Correct. And actually, that was part of the reason why I called him, because I wanted to tell him he had a grandson. But, just in a matter of a minute, I figured it sounded like I was bothering him, and he wasn't really interested. So I never even made it that far.
Some of these questions that you posited in your op-ed, why did your mother choose an obviously flawed man to be your father? Well, she was in love, accepted, and shut up. That's the response you say society gives. Why did your father not fight for his involvement in your life? Well, it was hard to achieve at the time, so he gave up, accepted, and move on. The accepted and move on, accepted and shut up that society responds with, you say generally, is not something that people should accept.
Yes. I accept that my parents are flawed. I love my mother, but she's flawed, just like I'm flawed. I wasn't a perfect parent either, but I tried my best. But if someone came to me and said, hey, you made a mistake here, I acknowledge it, I'm accountable for it, but we kind of have an unaccountable culture when it comes to parents. You get the reflex, well, there is no parenting guide, right? And just acting defensive. And yes, if you make poor choices, you should acknowledge it. And the reason being is if you see someone that is making a similar poor choice or going towards the direction, and you learn that lesson, you're more likely to stop them from doing it. But what's happening is, well, if you're not accountable, you're not going to hold the next person accountable either, because you're basically calling out yourself if you see someone doing the same thing. So that's how we get single parenthood culture, where we applaud single parenthood and we ignore the strife of being a single parent, because no one wants to acknowledge that this is not the best strategy for raising children.
Right. I mean, it's interesting you say that, because when we were talking about your op-ed on an earlier show, look, the data on this is overwhelming. I mean, it's not just about data, and we know some single parents do a heroic job and so forth. That's all stipulated. But the data in terms of the higher incidence of bad outcomes is irrefutable, and there's a ton of it. So it's not really in question, and nobody's sort of castigating anybody. You were just talking about best environment to raise kids, because remember, it's about them. And that's what I was struck by in your op-ed, because it seems to me that you're on that track too. And we've had these sort of fits and starts to have this conversation as the illegitimacy rate across the board, all races, has spiked over the last 40 years. But it's always Barack Obama says something about fatherhood, then it recedes. I mean, Bill Cosby, before he self-immolated, just said something about fatherhood, then it receded. Other people just generally talking about it, again, not specific to the black community, but just across the board, the problem of broken homes, as they used to be called. And maybe we're at a moment now where we have another start, and we'll see if it's just a fit.
Yeah, and just to go back to what you were originally saying, when it comes to criticizing single parenthood, like you said, the data is there. So it's not about the data. What it becomes is about the feelings. And it's a lot easier to make a point when you're the victim of something, but when you're disconnected from it, right? When you're some statistician who had both his parents and went to some prominent school, pointing out some stats, it doesn't land with people, and they see it as you criticizing them from up above. But when you're someone like myself who's a victim of a circumstance, who is pointing this out, which is rare because everyone's afraid of offending one of their parents or both of their parents for pointing out an obvious flaw. So I think that's why I wanted to use my story. It's not to tell a memoir, but it's to use it as an example of this is what can happen. The years of struggle. Yeah, I didn't go to jail. I didn't get involved in crime or anything like that or drugs. But
well, you went through
suffered a lot
depression.
because of
I
it.
mean, depression is
Right.
personal jail, and how long did that take to get out of depression?
I mean, decades for me. Suicidal ideation starting from a very young age, being admitted into a mental hospital at the age of 8. Like, this is the real life struggle that I had. And this stems from a chaotic childhood, uncertainty, financial uncertainty, housing insecurity, being homeless a couple times when I was a kid. That's where all this comes from. The single parenthood contributed to it.
How with combating that depression, and how did you pull out of it?
I would say, one, my son, because there is something greater than me, and I needed to fix these things. So I was constantly trying to find small ways to improve myself. Therapy was a really big thing. I went to therapy a couple times for different reasons, but the first time I really went to therapy as an adult, I realized how much I was holding on, and how many things that I never resolved. I just kind of hid it. And even with talking about going to the mental hospital at the age of 8, I completely blocked that out until my sister one day brought it up. And all of those uncomfortable memories, all those visions of being there came back to me. So, there's a lot to resolve by just actually talking about it and not pretending it doesn't bother you.
How did you make your way through school, particularly with some of those challenges you just described?
School was sort of difficult, especially when I entered high school. I believe I had dyslexia, but no one noticed. At one point, if I was to read out loud, I was literate, but if I was to read out loud, it sounded like I didn't know how to read, and people thought I was joking. And I struggled studying. So there were a lot of little struggles here, but because of it, the last 3 years of my high school years, I didn't pass. I had to go to summer school, and that also included my last year. So I never walked with my class. I had to take a summer course to graduate. And it's not a testament to my lack of intelligence or anything. I was just struggling, and I was also struggling with self-esteem too. And no one in my school, granted I went to a public school, but no one within my public school noticed that I was actually struggling. They just pushed me along.
So how did it turn? I mean, I haven't read your book yet, but I read the op-ed clearly, and I mean it's very well written. So something turned at some point where you figured it out.
I would say I really figured it out in my early 30s. I ended up going to tech school, built an IT career, but in my early 30s, I started solo traveling, and I accidentally kind of got over my anxiety because when you go to a foreign country, everything is foreign to you. It's like, diving into the deep end, not knowing how to swim. Yeah. So you just kind of figure it out. And by doing that, my life started to really improve because that anxiety was the biggest thing that was holding me back. And that was like the start of getting over my anxiety, my depression. My career started to take off. And I really started to be introspective about my life and how I'm moving. And then my son started getting older. He started getting towards his teenage years. And I really saw how important I was. Obviously, like I knew, but it's like right in your face when your son is starting to become a man and he's doing your mannerisms and he looks like you and he's looking up to you. So I think both of those were very prominent reasons.
And I can only imagine the reactions to your op-ed and to the book. You've got to be hearing from a lot of people that went through similar things.
Yeah, I've been talking about this topic for some time. The book is a culmination of many of conversations, or the reason why I started writing it was because of all these conversations. I've talked to fathers recently who have messed up and they want to get back in their children's lives. And I'm encouraging them to not give up. You know, every kid wants to have a relationship with their parents. But I've also had a really heartwarming conversation with my mother because she didn't know I was writing all this. I didn't want her feelings beforehand to stop me from being honest. So we had a really honest conversation. So I feel even closer to my mother because of it. Because there were a lot of things that she didn't know.
Really interesting. Adam Coleman, the author and founder of Wrong Speak Publishing, his book, The Children We Left Behind, How Western Culture Rationalizes Family Separation and Ignores the Pain of Child Neglect. Adam, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with the book.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Grit Regional Manager sought by Nexamp Incorporated to lead regional grid integration team, manage workloads, set priorities, and ensure team is aligned with Nexamp's strategic goals. Requirements are a master's in electrical engineering or related, plus 2 years experience, 1.5 years experience in DER interconnection, domestic travel up to 20%, a flexible schedule in office, and may work remotely within commuting distance to the Chicago office 2 to 3 days per week. Salary is $155,800.06 to $182,000 per year. Benefits include a 401k, health, dental, vision insurance, paid time off, commuter benefits, cell phone reimbursement. Please email your cover letter and resume to recruitment@nexamp.com with attention Nexamp 2024 in the subject line. 101 North Wacker Drive, Suite 200, Chicago, Illinois 60606. That's recruitment@nexamp.com with attention Nexamp 2024 in the subject line.
Reliability isn't optional when business security is on the line. It's essential. Businesses